is a webinar about building continuous improvement culture, and this will be available on the website afterwards, and please feel free to share it with other people in your organization. So if you can see the questions, please just pop in questions as we go through, and as soon as I notice them, I shall try and answer them. So I'm going to go and switch over onto the PowerPoint. So hopefully you can see the slides now. And what we're really talking about is building a continuous improvement culture, engaging employees, benefiting customers, and driving results in only 1 hour a month. Now that's a big claim, I know that, but it is possible because I have done it and I have seen it done. So we'll explain a bit more as we go through. Now I have shared both the slides via this webinar and also an article that I've written that goes along and complements pretty much exactly what I'm going to discuss during this particular webinar. Both are available for download. If you don't manage to download them during the webinar, we'll send these out after the webinar is complete. So let's start by considering why we might need improvement. And there's a whole range of different reasons. Obviously, the global financial conditions changed about 2008, and a lot of organizations are still under considerable financial pressure. And what that means in many cases is that when people are move on or leave the organization, the people are not recruited in their place, which means that there's more work for the people that are left. So more work and higher expectations are just things we have to live with. And the customers expect more. And I don't know whether this is due to the internet, so that everything is much more visible, but customers are much more demanding, and we've got to do more in order to meet up to those expectations. Thirdly, it might be your own organization's goals and targets. It might be very difficult to meet those, very stretching targets with the limited resources that you have. Number 4 is low productivity. You've probably seen in the press over the last few weeks the discussion about low productivity, in particular that people in France produce in 4 days what it takes the people in the UK 5 days to produce. Now, our productivity has actually been falling for several decades now. In the 1970s, productivity growth was about 5%. Unfortunately, today it's less than 1%. And what that means is that our children will be the first generation to be worse off than their parents. Now, is continuous improvement the only answer to that? No, but it's an important stepping stone in trying to fix some of these issues. And the final one is low employee engagement. There are a whole lot of people that really just don't enjoy their jobs. They're pressurized by numerical targets, or they feel that there's too many hassles and problems, and every day is a battle just going to work. And they breathe a sigh of relief when they get home and they go, oh, that's good, that's done. Tomorrow I'll go back in and I will fight the good battle again. So all of these are issues which we would encourage us to try and build continuous improvement. Now, as members of Quality Scotland, you're obviously familiar with the EFQM excellence model, which provides an excellent framework for driving improvement and really identifying the areas which your own organisation must improve in. And in particular, I want to point you to the radar model. So once you've defined your required results from the EFQM model, then you plan and develop what approach you're going to take to do that, deploy the approach, and then assess and refine what comes out of that. And I think that continuous improvement and problem solving should be a huge part of the approach you take to improvement within your organization. It's not everything, which we'll cover a little bit later, but it should be a very large part of it. So let me start by saying that there are 3 types of change. Okay, so disruption, transformation, and incremental. So what do we mean by those? Well, disruption is really invention. It's creation of a completely new service, or maybe a new product, or generation of an entirely new market. Now, these things come along about once in a generation. So if you're hanging your hat on a disruption and invention for your organization's improvement program, then you're probably going to have to wait quite a long time. So an example might be the motor car. When that came along, it completely disrupted the horse and cart. One of my favorites is iTunes. Completely disrupted. It changed the way that we buy and listen to music. And even the internet has really changed the way that we work, and in many respects changed the way that we live. The next one then is transformation. And this is really an investment. These are the large projects that take a full attention of the leadership team. So there's money and resources allocated to this, and everybody's focused on this large transformation project. You can't do too many of these in any one year or even a couple of years because it really does take so much time and energy from the organization. But the one I want to focus on today is the continuous improvement, the incremental improvement that we often miss. And in my terms, I define continuous improvement as daily problem solving. Every person, every process, every day. So people just making their work better step by step, making the work easier, faster, better, and cheaper. And if we can do this, it's a little bit like finding gold nuggets hidden all around the organization. Now, if the leadership team are going to try and devote their time to finding these, you're only going to find a few. But if you can actually involve everybody in the organization, then continuous improvement can quickly become a way of life. And people realize that they have the authority and the autonomy to go and fix their own problems. And it becomes self-sustaining. And you really can get towards that goal of running a continuous improvement program in an hour a month. So I'm going to frame this webinar around 3 questions. Firstly, what do you want to do? So what's the purpose behind this action, this improvement program, shall we call it? Then how are you going to do it? And this is the bit that's often missed. So what method are you going to apply to driving improvement in your organization? And then finally, when's it done? Okay, so continuous gives you a little bit of a clue. It's never done, but you have to be able to measure the improvement in order to maintain momentum and develop sustainability for your continuous improvement program. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn. And the first one, what do you want to do? And I'm going to imagine that you want to build a continuous improvement culture within your organization. In other words, you want every person solving problems in their own work every single day to the benefit of the customers, to them and their other employees, and overall it drives the organization's results. I'm going to frame it really as a system approach. Okay, so I spent the first few years of my life on Islay, off the west coast of Scotland. My dad was a farmer, and I remember the milking stool that he had to go and get the milk early in the morning. It had 3 legs, and that meant it would never overbalance on an uneven floor. And it's a good way of looking at the system that makes up your organization. And the 3 legs of the stool are technology, people, and process. Now, I'm very fortunate. I get the opportunity to go in and visit lots and lots of different organizations. So my role is really teaching and coaching continuous improvement. And before that, I was involved in site management. So I ran biotechnology sites. And before that, I was a project manager on construction of new facilities. And in going and visiting lots and lots of organizations, I think it's, as a sweeping generalization, I would say that they've generally got really good services or products, depending if they're a manufacturing company. Excellent people who could offer a huge amount more than they're being asked to, and terrible processes. So the people are having to battle against that. And it's very tempting to think, well, we can fix that by just buying new technology. If only we had a better CRM system to keep track of our customers. If only we had a better machine to do this, or if only we had a better computer system in order to help us create the service that we provide. These tend to be very large investments, and these are transformations, really. So I'm not going to cover any of that, because I think you can make huge improvements by focusing on the process. And that's really what I'm going to do today, is try and look at processes. And I love this next slide. It's the first one is what management thinks the process is, which is okay. It's not perfect, but it's reasonable. The next one is what the process really is. Okay, and it's much more convoluted and broken. But the one, it should be much simpler than that. But in the end, it really could be a whole lot simpler than that again. And that is one of the reasons why our productivity is so low, is because we have broken and convoluted processes. And we don't notice them. We see only our part of the work, so we assume that everything else is okay. But when you look at the whole big picture, the processes across an organization, you can see many, many opportunities for improvement. So if I move on to the next slide, and this is the common way that people would start to build a continuous improvement culture within the organization. They would set up really three levels of work. And at the top, there would be leadership. And the key role of leadership is defining the system, establishing the metrics and the measures, and then selecting the priority projects. Okay. Below that, we have some form of continuous improvement team. Okay, and their job is to train, coach, and facilitate in whatever method you've chosen is the way forward. Secondly, to coordinate the program, just what projects are running, who needs to be trained. And thirdly, to communicate the good work that's going on and to manage that change program, because you will always get resistance to any change within an organization, even if the benefits are very, very clear. And the key thing is that people don't resist being changed. They resist being changed. They don't resist change in itself. And then at the bottom of the slide is improvement teams. So what they do is they follow some sort of improvement method to solve those problems on a daily basis. Okay? So they map the process as it happens to be at the moment. They analyze the data from the process and they solve problems. And if you can get to that nirvana of daily problem solving, then it makes your journey to continuous improvement has well and truly started. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the improvement experience, and this comes from a book. I must guess it must be about 15 years old now. A guy called Joseph Pine wrote this book called The Experience Economy, and he split organizations and the work that's done within organizations into 4 different categories or scale phases. And the first one was commodities, then products, then service, and then experience organizations. And you can actually go onto YouTube and find Joseph Pine. He does a great explanation of this using the birthday cake. But I'm going to talk a little about coffee because it's one of my favorite things is coffee. So if we think about coffee as a commodity, the farmer for growing the beans for that would make a cup of coffee might make a few pence. I don't know, 3 pence per cup. So that's the commodity. The product is once the beans have been roasted and ground and are sitting on the supermarket shelf. It might be 15 pence, maybe up to 20 pence a cup to buy that particular product. If you have a service, so somebody makes that coffee for you, or you just buy it out of a vending machine, it's actually provided for you in the moment, then it might cost £1 or £1.20. But if you want to go and have an experience of a coffee in a nice environment, then you would go to somewhere like Costa's or Starbucks, and those are those little treats that we allow ourselves. Then we are perfectly willing to pay £2, £2.50, £3 for that experience that involves drinking coffee in a nice environment. Now, all of these are necessary in order to make coffee work. You can't suddenly say, well, it's not worth growing the coffee because we don't make any money in that, because the rest of the phases all collapse. So all the phases are necessary, but the way you drive improvement changes as you move from commodity through to experience. So if you have a commodity, you're growing coffee beans, you might be digging iron ore out of the ground, you might be pumping oil out and shipping commodities around the world, then the way to improve is economies of scale. Just get bigger. Buy bigger ships to transport your iron ore, buy bigger machines to dig it out the ground, just grow more coffee, have a larger acreage of coffee to try and reduce your costs. And it's very much about cost at this stage in the commodity business. So once you move on to making a product, you're into manufacturing and assembly. Within that world, then you want to try and standardize as much as possible. You want exactly the same raw materials coming in every time. You want the process to run the same way every time, and you want the same product to come out every time. And you're really driving for the ultimate efficiency. You're trying to sweat your assets as much as possible. But note, it would be a mistake to just apply economies of scale to production. Just building a bigger factory doesn't mean to say that you're going to be more successful. Small, efficient factories can be very, very successful, even when there's lower labor costs in another part of the world. Once we move up to the service, then it becomes very different. And the way that you improve there is by team-based problem solving. And the reason is because service is often a hidden process. You don't see it. It might happen in customer conversations. It might happen in meetings. It might happen in computers, but you can't see it. Therefore, you've got to involve the people doing the work in driving the improvements of the work. And it would be a mistake to apply either economies of scale. So let's imagine that you just want to build the biggest back office function ever by driving economies of scale in service. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to deliver very good customer service. Similarly, by applying the standardization route of manufacturing, you can often alienate your customers. So as an example, if you've ever called up a call center and very quickly you realize that they're reading from a script and trying to treat you the same as the last customer, that can be quite an alienating service call and something that the customers don't like at all. The best way to improve service is to have the people who do the work solving their own problems. And again, as I said, daily problem solving, every person, every process, every day. And as we move up to the top of the phases, the experience, then you really have to design the system to create the maximum experience for the customer. So for example, Starbucks started out with the idea of being the third place. You would have home, you would have work, and the third place was Starbucks, where you would experience the coffee world as they designed it for you. But once you'd got going on that, you really need to involve the customer in refining the experience so that you're actually delivering exactly what they want, because you're asking them to pay quite a lot of money for it. So I want to pick out specifically the difference between product and service. So let's look at that. Now in manufacturing, as I said, what you're trying to do is trying to reduce variation. You're trying to apply standard work and you're trying to drive efficiency. You're treating your organization like a machine with a series of inputs and a series of outputs. And you want to get the same thing happening every time. So you apply manufacturing improvement methods, and that's fine. That works very, very well. And this world is visible. So you can get somebody, an expert, can go into an area and watch what's happening and very quickly define what's needed in terms of experience. It might be redesign of cells or putting in some flow systems or Kanbans or some pool system in order to remove the waste from that particular manufacturing area. If we look in contrast to service process improvement, this is very much about the customer journey. You have to focus on the customer, and it's about driving first-time resolution of any customer issues. And you're trying to drive effectiveness. It's doing the right thing for the customer. Now, you can try and apply some manufacturing techniques within service, but you often get very suboptimal results. What you've got to try and do is not try and measure lots of things and drive activity, but actually look at that end-to-end customer journey. So focus on the external into the organization rather than looking from the organization its own internal processes. So let's move on and give you an example of what works in one area and what doesn't in another. Now, many people will have heard of the 7 wastes. Now, this comes from the Toyota production system. Taiichi Ono developed it as part of developing Toyota many, many decades ago. The acronym that I use is TIMWOOD, and I use this in manufacturing. It works extremely well. The T is for transport, is moving of materials and information around the organization. I is for inventory. So these are stocks of things. Could be finished goods, materials, information, things just lying around for you to use later. M is for motion, and that's really it's a people waste. People moving, stretching, bending. Yeah. W for waiting, and it's materials, information, and people that are waiting. O, over processing, doing more than is necessary. And the other O is overproduction, making too much or making it too soon. And then finally, the last one is defects, anything that needs to be corrected or scrapped. Now, those 7 wastes have been around for many decades, and they've been applied very successful to visible processes, and it works really well. But if you go into a hidden process, so imagine you walk into a modern office. Okay? Everything looks great. People are nicely dressed. There might be pot plants, nice lighting. Okay? Everything looks great because you can't see what's going on. You need to talk to the people and understand what's happening in their world to realize that many of the processes are broken and convoluted. So the waste that we focus on in the service world, the one of hidden processes, is the coped wastes. In other words, we've coped up until now, but it's no longer good enough. So the C is for checking. And these are any reviews, approvals, reporting, testing that's required. Oh, I need to get a signature on that form. I need to get it approved before I can do it. The next one is overdoing. So these are really complex forms, lots of bureaucracy, red tape, additional signatures. Maybe you want to recruit somebody into the organization, but you can't do it because you need to have 7 signatures on the form. Okay? It's completely overdoing it. So much of my career was in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, and one of the places where I took over had a batch record for making a medicinal drug, and it had 7 signatures on it. But the problem with 7 signatures is once you get to number 4, they think, oh, I don't have time. I'm sure the other guys have looked at it, and I know that signature number 5 is so I've focused on the detail and never let anything pass. And what happens is that people just sign it and actually don't check it because they don't take responsibility. It's spread over many people. Okay, so that's overdoing it. The P is the biggest one really in service. It's poor communication. It's a mixed or incomplete message. So it's meetings that don't come up to the mark. People leave that meeting and they go and do different things because they haven't understood exactly what is being said. And the acid test is, would everybody at every level in your organization make the same decision based on that piece of information? And if you haven't, then you've got poor communication, and you need to look at your communication strategy and how things get done, how decisions are made, and how those messages are passed out through the organization. E is errors, so similar for the visible processes, anything that needs to be fixed later. It could be errors in an invoice, it could be transcription errors in typing into a computer system, it could be misunderstanding a customer and having to go back and speak to them again to get the information. And then delays. Now, delays are really the best window on waste. So they're great ways of finding out whether there's waste in your organization. And reducing the cycle time, the time to do a particular process, always increases productivity, always improves quality, and always reduces cost as well. So it's a great one to focus on when you're trying to drive improvement. So the next point I want to make is this difference between expert-led and involving everybody. Now, I'm a great fan of trying to get everybody in the organization to be involved in continuous improvement. Every person, every process, every day. I've said before. But in many organizations, they prefer to have somebody who's an expert. Now, that could be an external consultant that comes in and they can run a few projects. So it might be a Lean Six Sigma consultant come into manufacturing area and run some projects. But even doing that over a couple of years, you're going to get less than 10 projects. And those are going to be big projects because you're investing a lot of time and resource. Even if it is an internal team, they have to budget for them and they have to demonstrate that the return on investment makes the investment worthwhile. The problem is that if one of those projects doesn't go so well, it can really derail the whole program. And you're waiting for that expert resource before you can actually get on and make any improvements. So I prefer the way where you amplify your effect in an organization. In other words, you teach people a simple method and they can go on and repeat that many, many times. Repeating it, and it could be dozens into hundreds of projects a year. I was fortunate enough to visit a plant in the US recently that had just won the best facility in the US. And they were running for an organization of about 240, 250 people, 600 to 700 improvement projects a year. Now, these are little things, small things, but everything was a step in the same direction. Everything was linked back to the overall goals and targets. Okay, so that's the culture. I want to talk a little bit about methods. So how would you do that? What method would you apply in order to drive improvement? Now, this comes from a book called Selecting Your Improvement Program. And if you go on to my website, the Simple Improvement website, you can get that for nothing. That's a free download. If you want the physical book, then those are available too. You just have to pay the postage. Okay? And I'll show you some of the links to get to those at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to go through very quickly just some methods, and you can go and find out more or get in contact with me and I can explain a little bit more. I just want to give you an overview of some of the things which are out there. Plan, Do, Study, Act came from a guy called W. Edward Deming who worked with Walter Schuhart. We're talking nearly 100 years ago now that this was developed. It's probably the most effective method we've ever come up with in humans, because this is really the basis of all scientific research, Plan, Do, Study, Act. And if you've got somebody in your organization that really knows what they're doing and is a continuous improvement expert, just doing a very simple Plan, Do, Study, Act can really, over a year or two, really transform that organization through lots and lots of little steps. Usually not sufficient on its own. So many people start with process mapping. So this is an example of how to boil an egg. Perfect eggs every time. Try it. It works. There's also you can see the symbol in the top right hand, which is it's an article on process mapping. This is a free download from my website, and at the end I'll show you where to find that. Just a great way of driving improvements by making a process visible. So I mentioned earlier on that people tend to just see their own work, and that looks very sensible. But once they map out the whole process from start to end, say a customer journey, they immediately go, well, why do we do all of that? And the 6 most expensive words in business are, we've always done it that way. Process mapping is a great way to start off an improvement program. But once again, you need a method to drive improvements to actually solve problems. So next is lean manufacturing. There's lots of other webinars available through Quality Scotland on lean and Six Sigma. So I'm not going to go into it too much. Very, very effective for assembly, manufacturing, engineering, all the visible processes. It works really well. And the focus is on the cash to cash cycle. And it's waste elimination, and it works, but it's actually quite difficult to implement. The projects are led by Lean Sensei, which I was one for several years, going around qualifying lean site coaches. But it takes a long time to internalize. Quite difficult. And even if you recruit your own people with a lean background, the cost can be quite high because it's a long-term program. But if you're in the assembly or manufacturing business, that's definitely the way to go. Six Sigma, and once again, the Lean and Six Sigma are starting to be becoming that hybrid. But it started out from Motorola, electronics manufacturing, printed circuit boards. And their focus was variation reduction. very, very high volume manufacturing, it works extremely well. Some quite complicated statistics in there. So to qualify as a black belt, it can take many months of hard study. And the projects are led by these black belts, the statisticians. Again, very, very good for hidden processes with high variability and very high volumes. It works well in those cases. Agile, you may have heard of Agile, and this came out of many IT project management disasters in the 1990s. And it grew into what was known as the Agile Manifesto. So it's a software development tool, and it incorporates many of the ideas from other improvement programs, from Deming, from the Toyota Production System, lean manufacturing. And it's about trying to do things concurrently. So rather than the traditional waterfall project management where you do one thing and then another thing, and you get to the end and deliver the whole thing, it's you deliver some small part of it and test it out with the customer. So the example might be building a website. So you might build the home page and let the customer try it and see whether that worked before you built the other 20 or 30 or 100 other pages that go behind it. It's done in scrums. I love these terminology things, but it's just people meeting together and trying to get things to go concurrently rather than in a stepwise sequence fashion. So great for software. System thinking, great for very hierarchical systems that need to go through a complete system redesign. It has its origins in academia, so you have to be careful about who you talk to systems thinking about, because you can be there for hours and hours and hours. I wrote an article on simple systems thinking, which again is available for download on the website. And I got phone calls from people who were systems thinkers saying, well, you haven't quite got the nuance of that particular point right, and you need to read these people and this. So it's a very esoteric subject. The guy who's having most traction in the UK is a guy called John Seddon of Vanguard fame. And if you want to read about it, Russell Akoff and John Seddon of Vanguard are very good. Freedom from command and control is a great entry into systems thinking. Or you can read the article on my website. So that I should really have said those projects are really done by external experts. It's somebody who understands organizational system design. It's not done by the employees. And it tends to alienate them. Okay, so I'm coming on to, this is my favorite. I love this. It's a thing called Practical Process Improvement, and it's developed by a guy called Ed Zunich, who ran the US Navy land-based training site, had about 7,000 people, and then he was responsible for the training of 250,000 of the North Atlantic Fleet. And what he was trying to do was solve problems and improve quality within the Navy. So he came up with lots and lots of things. So he had a huge budget, and he could employ people like Deming and all the best consultants to try and come in and work with the Navy. And when Ed retired, he thought, well, I like bits of it, but it's all just a bit too complicated. So he simplified it into an 8-step method, which is really team-based problem solving. And it's done by regular employees. So you don't need to have a degree in continuous improvement. You don't need to have a black belt in Six Sigma or anything to run this program. So it takes very, very little time to internalize. And the overall costs of doing so are extremely low. So here's how it works. So at the start, we get leadership to select the priority issues, and that's to make sure projects are linked back to the overall goals and strategy and targets of the organization. Then we inform employees into the teams, and these are employees doing the actual work. Okay, so it's not managers or supervisors, it's the people actually doing the work. And all they do is work through the 8-step method. And when they come up with the solutions, which comes from the analysis of the data, then leadership implement the solutions. So we kick that back up a level to make sure it gets done, because really the project teams don't have the authority to make those process changes. And then we go around that cycle again. And initially, you need to train the project team, which can take 3 to 5 days, but you're also doing a project at the same time. You'll need a trainer to do that, and you need to make sure that leadership pick the right projects. But once the team's been trained, they can then go on and do more projects, because practice makes permanent. and they actually get better and better. So continuous improvement is a skill. So the more times they do it, the better they get at it. The second, third, and fourth projects, maybe a few more than that, they'll have a facilitator. And this isn't somebody that's going to teach you because they've already been taught the practical process improvement method, but it's just somebody to guide them to the process, to keep them going and keep the team moving. And this is all based on a series of books. I think the best training books in continuous improvement, because they are ones that can be picked up and internalized within an organization very quickly. You don't need to be an expert in order to be able to teach this. And I just make the point that they can be customized for individual organizations. So, for example, Aston University, they changed it to APEX, Aston Process Excellence. Or other organizations have changed the colors and put all the different logos on. That's something that can be done relatively easily. Now, once we get to our way of life, we're starting to get to those daily problem solving, every person, every process, every day. It's important to note that not everything is a continuous improvement project. There are some things where you think, well, we just need to fix that. Okay? We know what the solution is. Just get on and do it. And there'll also be these larger issues. So you might actually decide that the only way forward is to implement a new CRM system, and you need to buy some new technology for the organization. And these will be the transformation projects, the ones that attract the budget and the resources and all the time and energy from the leadership. But most of the improvement should be continuous improvement projects that are done by every person within the organization. Okay, so we're not talking about an expert team that goes around and makes those changes. Those models can work, but they tend to be a lot slower and they're a lot riskier. If you've got an instance where people are solving dozens or hundreds of projects a year, then you can make really rapid improvement. Okay? And all you're doing then is freeing people up and their creativity and their focus to make it better for the customer, rather than battling through things that don't work, convoluted and broken processes. Okay, so the final thing is really, well, how do we measure that? Because if you want to improve something, you have to be able to measure it. There must be a way of measuring it. But unfortunately, we seem to have lost our way with metrics and how we collect and analyze data. So the first thing is, let's make it visual, if I can say it, visual. So I love this picture. Okay, it's very clear which way you're going to go for cupcakes, or you don't want cupcakes, you go the other way. Okay, so try and make things visual, but put them up on the wall. But you need to analyze your data. It's not enough just to collect information. You need to be able to analyze it and allow people to make decisions. So I wanted to just touch on a thing I call data quackery. And these are metrics, charts, and reports that look pretty, promise much, but are pretty worthless. And the example that we've got on the slide here is what we call metrics wallpaper. You've got dozens and dozens of charts displayed on a corridor, on a wall somewhere in the organization, and it looks really pretty, but actually nobody really understands it. Nobody spends any time studying it. And it's all the effort is putting into collecting and putting these charts up on the wall. We don't do any analysis, and therefore our decisions are just based on the old gut feel. In other words, we're guessing. Okay, so we have to think about some very simple, data analysis principles. And Quality Scotland offer a workshop on data quackery, and that's really a very simple way to look at data analysis and understanding variation. So what's routine variation, what's exceptional variation? Because if you make a mistake, then you can run off on a wild duck chase. Okay, so we've got our duck friend on the left of the slide there. And then the two key questions I ask of any process data: has my process changed, or is it just routine variation? And then, well, what do I need to do about that? So if it's changed, so there's some exceptional variation, I've got to find that and fix it. And if it hasn't, even if it's stable and predictable, maybe the variation is too high, and we need to move that, or we need to move the overall average for that process. We need to be able to link our metrics directly from strategy. Okay, we need to show that there's a real benefit to the organization. And I make the distinction between key results indicators, which tend to be the backward-looking agglomerated measures of an organization. So something that might be interesting to an external stakeholder. And the key process indicators are really what we're measuring on the day. So do they actually help you understand what's happening now? Do they help you learn about the process? And do they drive the right behaviors? Okay, so the data quackery is a lot about behaviors and how, if we apply things like numerical targets and internal competition and ranking, then we can drive the wrong behaviors even when we had the best of intentions. And the key thing is to measure the work, not the people. Now, I believe that for most people, there is only 4 data analysis tools you need: Pareto, histogram, run chart, process behavior chart. And that's what we teach in the data quackery class. There's a book. It's available now. I say available now. It's actually been printed and it's in the process of being dispatched to me now. So that's available on the Data Quackery website, or also it'll be up on Amazon as well. So let's just summarize this. I covered quite a lot of ground, but I just want to make sure that we get some of the key points about building that continuous improvement culture. And it's really around those 3 questions. So start by defining what you want to do. Are you really interested in transformation? So is this something going to be led by the leadership team, where you'd invest lots of time and resource and money in order to make it? Or do you want to drive incremental improvement, where the employees are making their work easier, better, faster, and cheaper without having to come for constant reassurance that they're on the right track? Do you want it expert-led or regular employees? So how you set your vision out for your improvement program really defines how you're actually going to then go into your training and coaching and how you run your projects. Then select an improvement program that fits your work. Okay, so if you're in manufacturing and production, then it might be Lean or Lean Six Sigma. If you're in service, then you're looking for some sort of problem-solving method. I like the ones that involve everybody. So my favorite is practical process improvement, and I've been involved in hundreds of projects, and it's always a very rewarding process to see the application of really, really simple tools can make huge benefits for the employees, for the customers, and for the organizations. And you can also develop your own program. So you might want to say a blend. So for example, if you do both manufacturing and service, you might want to have a blend of lean and practical process improvement. That's relatively common. And then finally, use metrics that measure your processes. Okay, so it's sufficient just to collect numbers. You actually need to analyze them and understand whether you've got routine or exceptional variation, and then drive them down towards that goal and close projects. So you're doing lots and lots of little steps. So can you build a continuous improvement culture in an hour and a month? Absolutely, because I've seen it done and I've actually been involved in it myself. So you have top down and bottom up. You start with top down projects to make sure that you're actually got business benefit, but then you want to move to lots and lots of little projects being done every single person every single day. Leadership form a steering committee, and their role is to pick the priority projects, track project progress, and manage resources. And you can do that in an hour a month if you give the people permission to solve the problems in their own work. And then finally, involve everyone. Amplify your improvement efforts. So a little bit of training translates into dozens or hundreds of projects when you use your trained people to run further projects. And build momentum by taking lots of little steps. It's finding those gold nuggets around the organization, because they're there in every single organization. So help with the 3 questions. There's the articles on the website. So www.simpleimprovement.co.uk, and if you click on the tab at the top for articles, I've actually shared the continuous improvement article, What is CI, with this webinar. But if you can't get it, you can download it or we'll send it out afterwards. And then the selecting your improvement program is trying to understand what method would be best for your organization. So again, it's on the Simple Improvement website, but it's also available from Amazon, and it's as the Kindle version. And then the final one, the Data Quackery book, will be out next week. And there will be other Data Quackery training workshops available through Quality Scotland. I think the next one we're looking at, probably the beginning of May, would be that out. the next one, and that book will also be available on Amazon. So just to finish this, it's really important that although you've got the EFQM model, you need a method, an approach to fit in with that and really drive your improvement program. So it's not enough just to identify areas for improvement. You need to actually execute and drive those improvements through to actually make those step changes. Okay, at the end of the slides are just a couple of pictures of the website. So practical process improvement is PPI X, or PPI excellence.co.uk, and then simpleimprovement.co.uk for the training, coaching, and facilitation, and then data Quackery, dataquackery.co.uk. And there's my contact details. And I really would encourage you to get in contact with me. I haven't seen any questions come through, and I'm not sure whether that's because that's not working or because you haven't got any questions. So we've got, let's have a look. So there's sort of 10 or 15 minutes until the close of the webinar. Are there any questions that people have? Please type them into the box, and I can answer those. There's a couple of people that said that they couldn't attend today, so they've sent me 2 questions to begin with. The first one was really about blending of different methods. So this question was, we've done a bit of lean training, but we haven't really made much of an impact on our other processes. They're talking specifically about their HR and their finance and their customer service process. All of the continuous improvement methods come from the same roots. We've all learned from each other. We've all adapted those ideas. So it's not that if you do lean, you can't do something else. These methods are perfectly compatible and you can blend them. But if you've got a hidden process, so service, for example, you're better to use team-based problem solving than some of the manufacturing improvement processes such as Lean or Six Sigma. If you do use Lean and Six Sigma in your service areas, and that it does work, I'm not saying that because I've seen plenty of examples where it does, you have to prune what you're teaching people, because there's a whole load of things which just don't apply to service, which are actually really important and essential within you when you've got manufacturing or any other kind of visible process. So I would encourage you to have a look at that and really try and pick the best method for the area that you're actually working in. I think that does make a big difference. Secondly, the second question I got was, how do you track the progress of your improvement method? Okay, so that's really a whole webinar in its own right. However, just very quickly, I would say 2 things. One is avoid trying to do really complicated scoring, because as soon as you put a number to something, then people put it in some sort of ranking, and then it drives all the wrong behaviors because people focus on the number rather than the improvement journey. So I would have it as, I use 5 levels. I use the innocence to excellence model. So innocence, awareness, competence, up to excellence, understanding, competence, and excellence. And you can then identify what each of the phases looks like. And you can say, well, what do we need to do in order to be able to get up to the next level? But if you want one metric, just one metric that is going to drive the right behaviors, allows you to understand what's happening in your process now, and helps you learn about how your company's continuous improvement program is running, then I would suggest just measure the number of completed projects over time. Set up a simple run chart, and you should see that growing exponentially as you're running lots and lots of little projects. So what does that mean? It means that you must be able to set up projects. So you might need to do some initial training, but you set up projects, but as soon as they're done, you close them down and you finish them so that they're done, and you build momentum. There's nothing worse than having a birthday party for an improvement project. Okay, I remember saying this at one event I was at the US, and somebody at the break brought me a picture of their cake they had for their improvement project. It was 1 year old. An improvement project should be a matter of a few days. That should be it. If you're taking longer than that, then you're having to get into program management and action tracking and all that nonsense and waste that comes with that. Set up a very simple project, get to some solution, implement it, shut the project down, move on. That's really the best way that we can go about it. Okay, so I can't see any other questions that are coming through. Is there anything that you want to share at the moment? I see nobody typing furiously. Okay, so I'm going to close the webinar down then, if I can figure out how to do that. I'm sure it can't be that difficult, really. Oh. Okay, so what I was trying to do was just show the webcam at the end there. Okay, so thank you very much for attending today. Have a look on the Quality Scotland website for the other upcoming webinars or even the training events. There's lots of really good things. It is the 25th anniversary, so there's some really special events going on this year with Quality Scotland. So keep in touch with the website, and then also have a look at the newsletters for things that are coming through. From my own point of view, have a look for Data Quackery. I think that could really make a big difference to many organizations. So it just remains for me to wish you a good weekend, and thank you very much for joining in. So, I've just thought, the questions do work, because somebody said thank you very much. Okay, great, thank you very much. And remember, all my contact details are at the end. Please send me any questions or any comments that you have. Okay, thanks very much.